This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Shem Egan Shir Torah Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's shir. I'd like to give you a big shikayach to Mr. and Mrs. Matas Abraham for sponsoring tonight's shir. Lili Nishmas, Sir Moshe Yaakov ben Matasio Sholem, Moshe ben Alta Chaim Ishaya, Chaim Mindel Bas Ishaya Yehuda Spas Moshe Yaakov, Yitasar Bas Rabbi Yisrael, and Havdel B'Chaim L'Chaim as a Chusar for Shlema for Gittel Bas Dvora, and for Shida Chog and Bekara for Chava Mindel Bas Rivka Chaya and Rachel Bas Gittel Miriam. Also, I'd like to give Yashakayach to the Gutman Newfield families for their support for tonight's year. Lili Nishmas Aisha Gittel, Basar Moshe La Sholem, Yosar Shchedish Ov. Also, I'd like to give Yashakayach to Rabbi and Mrs. David Lang for the support for tonight's year. Lili Nishmas Devara La Sholem, Basar Bishol Ner Yor. Mrs. Lang, yard side, second yard side tonight, Chavtes Tammuz. Also, I'd like to give Yashakayach to Elam Shem for the support of tonight's shir. This is Chus for Meir Chaim ben Chava Ito, the Zivug Hogan b'Mehera. To have the very Chus of sponsoring a shir or helping support Irgun Shir Torah, call Irgun Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Tonight we have the cover tablet. Us once again Rabbi Yonatan Rietti speaking on Are We Witnessing Amalek's Last Stand? My cover to call on Rabbi Rietti for tonight's drasha.
Thank you, Rabbi Bold, for inviting me again to your prestigious gathering. We find ourselves in the 3 weeks again. We're still in Galus, and tonight's presentation is entitled, Are We Witnessing Amalek's Last Stand? So, you know, when you read a history book, it's written by a historian, hopefully, and often the historian himself is not an eyewitness to the events that he's describing. He himself has researched the subject, a tekufa, a period in history, and so he's relying on the opinions of other people who often themselves are historians recording what they have learned but not necessarily witnessed. And so, in a sense, history is not very reliable. Masha ein kein lahavdil, the Torah and Nach is not a history book of events, dates, and stringing together the chronological sequence of those events as they unfold. It's Das Elokim. Hashem is not describing history in the typical sense. It's really His story. It's His reality from a Kadosh Baruch Hu's standpoint. And so when we're studying anything in history through the Torah, we're really reading our Kadosh Baruch Hu's mindset, which is emes. Emes correctly translates as reality. I know the translation we rely on is truth, which is not inaccurate, it's just not the whole truth. It's part of the truth. It really means reality, and contained in reality has to be truth as well. That was told to me by Rabbi Shimon Schwab of blessed memory. MS correctly translates as reality. So when we ask ourselves, let's look at Amalek. What do we know from what the Torah describes of who he is? What are the qualifying, identifying marks that enables us to know who is Amalek? After all, in Tariag mitzvahs, 3 mitzvahs are dedicated to, number 1, remembering what Amalek did. Number 2, don't forget what he did. And number 3, we have an actual mitzvah deoraisa to eradicate Amalek. Now you look at all the Rishonim who are Moinei HaMitzvahs in their description of the last mitzvah, to be moicha, to erase the memory of Amalek, because there's such a bilbul, a confusion of so many immigrants and so many wars that no longer can we reliably identify someone as Amalek. So you might argue that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself had to make the statement, I will wipe out Amalek. I'm going to fight him in every generation. That doesn't take away our mitzvah. We still have the mitzvah, but we don't know who to apply it to. But we do have identifying marks to get a very good idea who are we dealing with. If it's not an individual or a nation, but we collectively, when you put the identifying marks together, you have got the profile. And we're going to do that tonight, looking through what the Torah tells us about who Amalek is, and is there a clear parallel today in joining the dots as to who our enemy is. Because in the mitzvah to remember Amalek, we have to remember what it is specifically about their persona, their profile, what is their agenda, so that I can remember that when I see, hear, read about Amalek's agenda, I know that's my enemy. And it's not just my enemy. The worst enemy imaginable is an enemy who's waged war against HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. It's interesting that Harav Kook Hatzal had a number of conversations with Ben Yehuda, as did actually the Brisker Rav as well. And Ben Yehuda, as you know, he's the one who tried to take the Kodesh out of Lashon HaKodesh in establishing modern Hebrew. I think it's good that it's called modern Hebrew so that we know to distinguish it from Lashon HaKodesh. And at one point, he was attempting to actually remove the Taf from the alphabet because it already had a sounding letter in the letter Tet. Obviously, Ben Yehuda wasn't a Sephardi, and I'm not sure if he would have been Goyrus, the Sephardim, even if he... I'm sure he did know that Sephardim do make a very clear distinction between t and t, as in the tet. But he said that we don't need the taf, we can do away with it. So Rav Kook said that you can't do that because the word historia is spelt with a taf, and you can't take that out and put it in a tet, because that wouldn't mean the correct word. He says, why not? It sounds exactly the same. He says, you don't understand. Historia is made up of two words. Hester ka. Hashem is concealed in the story. Rather like Purim, never mentions HaKadosh Baruch Hu once, and yet the entire story is saturated with Hashgacha Pratis. It's his story. Yeshayahu Navi tells us, what I want to really say about using this as a metaphor, the concept of a story, is that when you are going through a story and there's ups and downs, good against evil, and it's a constant war, and there are battles on both sides where there are casualties, and you don't know till the last chapter who wins the war. So Kadosh Baruch Hu, in his infinite kindness, actually tells us up front many times who is going to be the victor in the final war of Gog and Magog, Amalek against Hashem himself. And therefore, I want to quote to you the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who on the Pasuk, I think it's in Perek Yud Zayin, I think it's Pasuk Hey, where we're told, Macha Timche Ezecha Amalek. Why is it a double lashon? He says, because I'm asking you, Moshe Rabbeinu, to tell Yeshua to wage war against Amalek, but I am going to also wage war so that you should not be despondent when you realize they use kishuf in order to win their wars. In the case of Moshe Rabbeinu, as you probably know, in Perek Chaf, in Bamidbar, Vayavai Canaan, the Canaanites came to attack the Jewish people when the Anani Akava disappeared because we lost that zchus from the demise of Aaron HaKohen. So Vayavai Melech Canaan, and it wasn't the Canaanites, it was actually Amalek. So why does the Pasuk call them Canaan? Because they dressed like Canaanites so that Moshe Rabbeinu and the Yidden, whose power is in our peh, that's our weapon, we would daven that Hashem should save us from the wrong people. And therefore the tefillah would be hal on someone else, and they would win the war. Moshe Rabbeinu chapped what was going on over here, and because of the confusion, he said, we're going to ask for a stum request. We're not going to specify, we're just going to say this enemy. And therefore we won that war. But that is the deceit of Amalek. We're going to look at the deceit of Amalek and how it applies today, how we can still see it glaring when we join the dots. Who is Amalek today? Yeshayahu Navi, most beloved of Nevi'im. I can't say more than Moshe Rabbeinu necessarily, but in Toldos Nevi'im, it brings that he was Zoicha to the most Nevuos. And the reason why Yeshayahu Navi was Zoicha to the most Nevuos was because of his tremendous Avas Yisrael and the Simcha he had whenever he was Mekabel Ol Malchut Shemayim. Because of that, Hashem gave him more Nevuos than anyone else. And the Nevuos, the vast majority, as you know, are Nevuos of Nechama. So this was turned into a famous song. I haven't heard it for a long time. Utzu etzaveh tufa. Our enemies, they will come up with all types of strategies. And you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to tear them up. Tufa, you're going to cancel them. Dabru dava velo yakum. They'll talk all sorts of decrees. And they'll come out with unimaginable decrees against us. And guess what? Lo takum. You will not let them last. They'll last for a short period. They'll never have a kiyum. Ki imanu kel. Because you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're with us. El means power. When we refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as kel, we're referring to him as the power. You are the power that's with us, and therefore we have no fear against our enemies or whatever weapons they use. And that's something we need to bear in mind as we start to unmask the profile of who is Amalek. But let me ask you right now, this nevuah was given to us approximately 3,500 years ago. Our enemies will never succeed against us. So, has that nevuah come true? So just go through our track record. We survived Shibud Mitzrayim, that was given before Yeshayahu Navi. Then we went through Galus Bavel, that's already after Yeshayahu Navi. We went through Galus Pras, we've been through Galus Yavam, we're still in Galus Edaim. We survived the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Cossacks, Tsarist Russia, Communist Russia, I forgot Tat V'Tat. We've been through the Holocaust, we've been through, jihad. And now is the war we're coming up to, is the war with Amalek. But so far, are we still here? Absolutely. How many of you went to yeshiva with a Babylonian? An ancient Greek? Ancient Roman? They're all gone! Oh, Utzu etzaveh tufar. It doesn't matter what strategies they come up with, you'll tear them up. You'll cancel them. And no matter what they talk about that they're going to hurt us, dabru dava velo yakum. It's not going to have any kiyum. Why? Ki imanu kel. You're with us all the way. Famous Gemara in Yuma Samach Tes, I believe it is. It's actually in the Mefarshim there that Rabbi Yeshua had an interesting interview with one of the Roman Caesars. And the Caesar challenged him. How is it possible that one sheep surrounded by 70 wolves could possibly survive? Got no chance. How is it you're still here? And Rabbi Yeshua said, such a simple answer. Why are you so focused on the one sheep in the middle with 70 wolves all around? Look above you and you'll see there's a shepherd who's guarding us. Oh, here we are, and Yeshayahu Navi's nevuah is still mekuyim, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a human being, that he's going to change his mind. So let me share with you a famous medrash Esther Rabbah. You'll find it in Perek Zayin, and it's in Ois Chav Gimel. It's a very famous medrash. Esav declares Cain a shoiter. Cain killed Hevel. So Esav says he was an idiot. A hediot. Hediot means an idiot in English. I think that hediot is the original Hebrew of that. You fool! You should have waited till Adam passed away and then killed your sibling or siblings, and then you would have inherited the whole world, it would have been all yours. So Esav thought he was smarter, but Parai says, Esav, you were the shoiter. Because you tried to kill your brother, but you didn't succeed. I'm going to be smarter than you. I'm going to kill all the men and all the women. And comes along Parai and comes along Haman and calls Parai a shoiter. Parai, you're the shoiter, because I didn't say it right. Parai only killed the boys, but not the girls. So Haman said, Parai, you're a shoiter, because the girls are the ones who determine the continuity of the Jewish people. So you should have killed the girls as well. So I'm going to learn from your mistake. I'm going to kill everybody. Men, women, and children, elders and babes. And comes along Gog and Magog and says, Shoitim harishonim, all the earlier enemies of the Jews were fools. I'm going to outdo all of them. Their mistake was they took on the Jewish people. I'm not going to bother with the Jewish people. I'm going to attack the guardian who was taking care of them, and that's why all the others before me failed. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns around, the Medrash says, to Gog and Magog, and says, Shaita, Rasha, you fool, you wicked man. I control the Malachim, the Srafim. I control earthquakes and thunder and lightning. There's nothing that I can't use as a shaliach to fight my enemies. I'm not going to send any of these soldiers against you. I'm going to take you on myself. So the question is, how does Gog Magog, Amalek, think that they're going to take on a HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What does that mean? So very simply, atheism, promoting atheism, and we're going to see its many different tentacles, the different arms of atheism. What does it mean that a person is an atheist? If someone, Has v'Shalom, doesn't believe that there's a Boireh, there's no creator, if he doesn't believe there's no Mashgiach, then, in the words of a famous Russian philosopher, Dostoevsky, in 1877, he made the following statement: in a world without God, everything is permissible. And that's the core of atheism. It's actually the core of Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, you might argue, is better than atheism because it believes in something. But actually, Chazal tell us, I think it's in Sanhedrin, round about Samach Gimel, I think, tells us, Yadu b'nei Yisrael, she'ein ba'avodah zarah mamash. We weren't so stupid to really think that stone and wood had a power to answer our prayers. So then why did we serve them? Ella lehatir arayas b'fahesia. The only reason, and this was the, if you want to call it the psychological background behind the Avodah Zarah, it had nothing to do with the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah was a heichatimsa. It was simply a mask, an excuse. Oh, my Avodah Zarah told me to behave this way. This is how you serve this religion. And so, really, Avodah Zarah is not real, and we knew it. But it became a heter to Has v'Shalom do the worst imaginable aveiros. That's a piece of what atheism really is about. It's not about an actual belief. It's actually the opposite. A person is now freed of the shackles of having to believe, having to be committed to any type of ism, because I am G-O-D who decides what's good for me. So let's look at the profile of who is Amalek, so we can get a better understanding of who are we looking at when we ask ourselves, what is this war meant to be, that Amalek is actually going to wage war against HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who is Amalek? So very simply, as you know, Esav, the son of Yitzhak Avinu, gives birth to Eliphaz. Eliphaz gives birth to Esav. You'll find this in Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk, I think, Beis Dalet. I'm sorry? So Eliphaz gave birth to Amalek. Thank you. What did I say? Esav. Esav gives birth to Eliphaz, and Eliphaz actually married Timnah. So Timnah is the one who mothered Amalek. Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, but it was also his daughter, Rahman al-Islam. Eliphaz committed adultery with the king of Seir, with King Seir's wife, and she gave birth to Timnah. Timnah became the concubine of her father and, of course, Eliphaz, and through them was born Amalek. I'm not quoting some esoteric work over here. Rashi points out that when you look carefully at the psukim in Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Dalet, and I think Ches and Yud Beis onwards, you'll see the chronological unfolding of who was who in Alufei Edom. That's that whole Perek over there. And Rashi himself points out in Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Beis, the reason why the Torah goes out of its way to show you who married who gave birth to who, is because if you're paying attention closely, it looks a little bit like a Mishnah in Yevamos. You start to realize, oh, Kulam, B'nei Mamzerim Hem. All of them, illegitimate. So the number one, I'm not saying it necessarily in this order, but I'm saying one of the biggest markers of who is Amalek is promiscuity. Decadence, immoral promiscuity. In fact, the day Esav, some say he was 13, others say he was 15, the day when Avram Avinu passed away, Esav was koifer be'ikar, koifer b'techiyas hamesim, and he was also ma'anis and Eishes Ish. So, Nara Murasa, I think it was it Eishes Ish? I forget which one it was. Nara Murasa, thank you. My memory's not as sharp as it used to be. And also, my memory is not as sharp as it used to be. So we see one of the hallmarks of Amalek is that his DNA is promiscuity. I don't like using the three-letter word, but that is what it is all about. It's all about lahatir arayas bifarhesia. And it's not just lahatir, it's legitimizing arayas. Another hallmark which Chazal give us, the Torah gives us, is Esav was Sayid Befiv. He was a brilliant hunter. And Chazal tell us he did it with his mouth. How did he do it with his mouth? So in contrast to Yaakov Avinu, his twin brother, Perek Hafei, who's called Ish Tam, says Rashi, Kalibai Ken Piv. Whatever he was thinking, that's what came out of his mouth. Leiv really means mind. I'm not going into it now. We've covered it a few times. Rabbi Victor Miller goes to town on this. Even Ezra and Ramban. Perek Vav Pasuk Hey. We say it every day. We're going to say it tonight soon. Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha. So says Ramban and Even Ezra on the word Leiv. Leiv hu hadas. I hope I don't have to translate that, but it means the mind. That's really what it's referring to. Kalibai ken piv. Whatever Yaakov Avinu was thinking, that's what came out his mouth. In contrast to Esav, who was echad bepeh ve'echad belev. What he said was not what was going on over here. He was manipulating people with his words. Deceit. It wasn't necessarily an open lie. It was deceit. Deceit means it's masked, it's covered up, and there might be qualifications between the way he looked and other things that made people believe he was honest and sincere. And that's one of the hallmarks of Amalek. In fact, the Vilna Gaon, when describing which animal is Amalek compared to, anyone? The Chazer, thank you. L'chaim, Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam she'akol niyah b'dvaro. Thank you. the Wilhelm II came to visit Yerushalayim in 1898. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, of blessed memory, refused to go out and make the rare bracha. It's a very rare bracha to see a king or someone of such high authority. And his grandson reported that his grandfather had a Kabbalah from his Rabbi, Diskind, who had a Kabbalah going back to the Vilna Gaon, that the German nation was Zera Amalek. And the profile to know that was outwardly, like the pig would show its hooves, because they were actually split, but the mouth didn't chew the cud. So the German nation, outwardly, Dankeschön, Bitteschön, very polite, cultured, refined, and inwardly rotten to the core in terms of decadence, immorality, no conscience, and basically the patriarchs of modern atheism, all born in Germany. And so because of that Kabbalah, he refused to make this rare bracha. So if you want, you could count this qualification that outwardly kosher, inwardly treif. And that's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Because I can be more easily lured by someone who behaves in so much derech eretz that I wouldn't think for a second that they're actually leading me to the gas chambers. A third item that helps qualify who's Amalek is that there's no regard for human life, even if they are burned in the process. That means Amalek's first encounter as a nation with the Jewish people, as we came out of Mitzrayim, was they came to attack us. They knew they had no chance against us. After the Makkos and Yetziat Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf, Chazal tell us that Amalek is always there to try and stop us learning Torah, because we're about to receive the Torah. And comes along Amalek, Vayava Amalek, V'yilchamu b'nei Yisrael b'refidim, and Chazal tell us refidim means that we even though we hadn't received the Torah yet, but the mitzvahs that we did get at Mara, and we knew from while we were still in the Shibud from Shevet Levi, Shabbos, Kibbud Avim, Paraduma, etc. We were already weakening in our commitment to learning, and that's what gave koyach to Amalek. There was a second item that gave him koyach, but he knew he was going to get burnt in the proverbial tub that was boiling hot, but his goal was to show publicly the Jews can be attacked. Even if you get hurt in them, but they can be attacked. Don't be in fear of their God. So you're starting to see a pattern here. So there's two reasons why we were attacked. There were two reasons. We were the cause of both. Number one, the pasuk before it says Vayava Amalek, Perek Yud Zayin, pasuk Ches. The pasuk before, pasuk Zayin, tells us that we had a question. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin? Is Hashem really with us or not? I mean, really? The Makkos and the splitting of the sea, you saw water turn to blood, you saw wind blowing the Arabah from the east to the west and back again, you saw light for the Jews, complete darkness for the Mitzrim, you saw Barad, you saw ice coexist with flames and come down with their own GPS system and knocking off limbs off the Mitzrim, and that wasn't enough to impress you? Is Hashem with us or not? So that refoyan, that weakness in emunah, is what empowers Amalek. That's why the juxtaposition of the two psukim, immediately, Vayavay Amalek, V'yilachem in Bnei Yisrael b'refidim. So it was for two reasons. Our lack of emunah, and you could argue, once we fall in that, then I don't necessarily have the same level of emunah I ought to have, that learning Torah is so precious, and it really is something that purifies our neshama and prepares us for nitzchias, for eternity. So if I don't really have emunah, it really goes hand in hand. If I don't really have emunah that if I finish one daf a day, I'll finish in 7 years, and I'll keep doing chazara, I might have a little bit of a kinyan. If I don't have emunah, so I won't even start. and then I give up Has v'Shalom. So the two are really hand in hand. And the Chazal tell us the kol of Yaakov is what keeps the hands of Esav in check. But when the kol of Yaakov is not properly heard, it's not because it's not loud enough. It's not with Simchan, it's not with Hislavos, and it's not with I'm just doing it because I'm a mechanical Jew. Then we give power to Esav, who Edom, who Amalek. There's a fifth qualifier, and that is throughout history, Amalek's personality is that he's a bully. Now, a bully is a word we have in English. Actually, in Lashon HaKodesh, there really is such a word. It's not bully, it's a very, very powerful word, but anyone who's studied bullying will understand the mechanics of it, will realize in Lashon HaKodesh how we've had this down pat for thousands of years. The word for a bully, I'm not going to throw it out, I'm just going to, for the sake of time, jump right in, is a roidef. A roidef is someone, as you know, has exceptional halachas, actually Tariag mitzvahs. Which is the mitzvah in Tariag mitzvahs that's negir to a roidef? A roidef is someone who's chasing someone with intent to harm them, or do a terrible aveira, or kill them. What's the halacha? It's a very strange halacha. It's really quite. So if you see someone who's about to kill, and let's say Mr. A is the roidef and is about to kill Mr. B, and I'm a bystander, I have a mitzvah to what? To either stop the roidef, Mr. A killing Mr. B, or harming Mr. B if his intent is, or if I can't harm him, what's my mitzvah? I can kill him. What happened to protocol? Witnesses, warning, based in, nothing. That's really exceptional. It's such a chomer thing that a roidef, you're allowed to kill the roidef to be matzil the nefesh of the nirdaf. And Hashem Elokim in Koheles Perek Gimel is always mevakesh the nirdaf. Hashem sides with the nirdaf, the one who's being chased. A roidef comes from the two-letter root rad. Rad is the two-letter root of yarad, which means to go down. And the first time it appears in the Torah is v'yirdu b'tgas hayam. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I've created you b'tselem Elokim, and I'm giving you the koyach that you are the ones who are on top of the fish of the sea, the fowl of the sky, and the animals of the earth. You have the power to be above, on top of. It's also used to oppress, but the concept really is the one on above is the one who's got power. In the world of bullying, the generic definition is the bully is constantly maintaining an imbalance of power. I'm on top, victim below. That is the definition of a bully in the world of bullying. And it's a very simple and it's generic. It applies in all situations, whether it's has v'shalom, a spouse to another spouse, or a boss to his own employees, or a parent sometimes to their own child, is using their advantage of either age or experience or qualifications or physical robust to be on top of and or intimidate emotionally or verbally. That is the definition of a bully. A roidef is rod pay. Pay is a mouth. Rod is oppressing with his mouth, because bullying always begins with usually verbal intimidation. So a roidef, it's interesting, very interesting. This is a bit of an aside, but just to give you an idea of these are the ingredients that we're talking about when we're looking for who's Amalek. In Chazal, it's a very, very unusual statement that if you use a nickname that's not the real name of a person and it's derogatory, it's negative, what's the consequences? Malchus? Arba Mises based in? No, that's way too kind. Ein lo chelek le'olam haba. Does that sound in alignment with the crime? He's calling him a negative name. He loses eternity for that. A roidef is a person that is using his mouth to oppress another person, put them down. And it can often start with a young child who's being bullied with a name: too fat, too tall, too slim, too nerdy glasses, nerdy hairstyle. The bully doesn't need a reason to bully. It just wants to have power above the other person. It is so chomer because Chazal knew what it can lead to down the road. When a person is bullied enough times, they can feel so intimidated, they are shut down into silence and can't stand up to the bully. And that is one of the ingredients of Amalek. Haman was a bully. Hitler, Yamach Shemai, was a bully, Shein Kamayu. The Nazis were bullies. I'm using the word bully in a kind, way too kind in this sense. You're talking about national intimidation. Why am I sharing this with you? Because there are three people in the bully equation. I'm not sure if I shared this with you in previous years. I'm just going to touch on it because it's extremely relevant to Amalek. Who are the three people in the bully equation? You've got the bully, the victim. Some people don't like using that word because it sounds too victimizing, so they use the word target. Okay, so you've got a bully and a target, and who's the third person? For those still awake. The people around who are watching what's going on. And in English we usually call them bystanders. Which is a deoraisa am I over if I stand there and do nothing? Al talmud, al dam reyecha. Don't stand by when you know that people are being harmed and I'm keeping quiet and doing nothing about it. In the world of bullying, there are three types of bystanders. There's bystander number one, who agrees with the bully. Bystander number one. Bystander number two does not agree with the bully, but is so afraid of being the next victim, target, that they keep quiet. And their silence is equivalent to being compliant to and agreeing to the bully. You hear the problem? Bystander number three, unfortunately much more rare, is so outraged by the injustice of this imbalance of power, he stands up to the bully. Who does Hashem want me to be? Who does Hashem want us to be? Bystander number one? No, that's Al Tamud Al Dam Reyecha. Bully number two? That's still Al Tamud Al Dam Reyecha. Who does Hashem want us to be? Bystander number three. What's the reward for such a person? Good, very good, exceptional. Sorry? Okay. His Mekayim Nefesh Achas MiYisrael. That's the lashon of the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. I think Dalet Mishnah Hey. He's keeping a person alive. What else? Who's the greatest human being in world history? Moshe Rabbeinu. What does the Torah report about him before Kadosh Baruch Hu is Megala himself in Perek Gimel Pasuk Aleph in Shemais, right there at the beginning of that Perek? You are only given 7 psukim. In Perek Beis, I think it's Pasuk Yud Aleph through Yud Zayin. You only read 7 psukim that describe his personality. There were 3 instances in those 7 psukim. Instance number 1, a Mitzri is beating a Yid. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He stands up and kills the Mitzri. The Mitzri is a roidef. So which bystander is Moshe Rabbeinu? Clearly number 3. The next day, the Jew, Aviram, whose life Moshe Rabbeinu saved, is now in a conflict with his brother-in-law, Dasan, because Aviram wants to divorce his wife who was abused by the Mitzri, and Dasan doesn't want his sister to be divorced, and one raises his hand up against the other, and the Torah calls him a rasha, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lama takarecha, why are you raising your hand against your friend? And what do they both do? They go and squeal on him to Parai. Which bystander was he over there? Number 3 again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervened. Where's the next instance? All in the space of 7 psukim, and that's all you know about his personality. Yeah, it says, Vayigdal, he grew, but you don't know anything about him. The only description is now in the 3rd, and that's all you know until Hashem speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu, panim el panim, for the first time. That 3rd instance, Moshe Rabbeinu, you think he would have learnt his lesson by now, that being number 3, not sure if it pays off. He had to run away, now he's a fugitive. He arrives in Midian, and there at a well are a number of daughters of Yisrael. They are completely unprotected, and there's a bunch of shepherds. The Medrash Agada says they were about to molest these young maidens, and Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayakam, he gets up, Vayoshian, and saves them. He didn't turn around and say, I know nothing. No. He stands up and does something about it. So, here you have, he's bystander number 1, agrees with the bully. Bystander number 2, keeps quiet. Or number 3, stands up to injustice. And what's his reward? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I need a leader with a spine, who when they see injustice to their flocks, to their children, to their congregants, to their people, you're going to stand up for them. You're my man. Moshe Rabbeinu is rewarded that he gets to be the Moshiach Shel Yisrael, takes us out of Mitzrayim. He's the one who receives the Torah from Shemaim. He's the one who speaks panim el panim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's immeasurable the schus that he has. And the Torah only gives us those clues to portray his personality and his profile. Bystander number 3. There's only one other personality who's anywhere close to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll give you a clue. We read about him a couple of weeks ago. Actually, the last 2 weeks. Pinchas! Pinchas sees an injustice. And people don't know where to put themselves. They can't remember what to do, and he does. And he acts on it. What's his reward? For murder. It's not really murder. He killed a Nasi B'Yisrael, and he kills a princess. What's his reward? For how long? Bris Olam. Hashem says, you're my man. You're standing up for me. Kinas Hashem. There was nothing personal about it. You weren't outraged with any iota of anger, because then it would have been personal, and then that would have been murder. You did it completely for me, and you saved the entire Jewish people because I wanted to wipe them out, were it not for your act. What else was his reward? Bris Kunas Olam. What else? Elionavi. He doesn't even die. Does it pay to be bystander number 1? Number 2. Number 3, we're being invited to stand up to Amalek. Will I be silent? Who is Amalek? So let's go figure this out. Amalek stands for being kaifa be'ika, being kaifa in Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim is huge. It's huge. It's the most prominent subject, believe it or not, in terms of repetition of the theme in our Shemona Esrei. You will not find any other theme that is repeated as many as 5 times as Tchias HaMesim. With such ma'aminim, we know it's going to happen. Every other nevuah Hashem has made has come true. The only 3, there's lots of small ones contained in the main 3. Oh, sorry. Is this good? The only 3 major ones is Kibbutz Galias and the coming of Mashiach with Binyan Beis HaMikdash and Tchias HaMesim. There are lots of nevuahs that are contained within those 3. I'm calling them like major headlines. Everything else Hashem promised has happened already. We're going to go into Galus not once but twice, 70 years in between. We'll be spread throughout the whole world. We'll remain few in number. And the land will remain desolate till you return. And when we started coming back, the original Yishuv was with a Baal Shem HaKadosh and 300 Talmidim, followed 30 years later, after 1877, 30 years later, over 500 Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon. And that was the original Yishuv until the Tzionim stole the opportunity and turned it into a political war. But really that's when it began. But the true Kibbutz Galius is only going to begin, hasn't started. We're in the process prior to it, but the actual starting point will be when Eliyahu Navi announces that Mashiach is coming. And that within the first few days of that announcement, there'll be the first Tchias HaMesim. There'll be 2 Tchias HaMesim. The first one will be right then. Eliyahu Navi, Pinchas. Wow. All for being someone who's not afraid to say, I'm on Hashem's side and I will not remain silent when atheism is rampant. So let me share with you and ask you if you can connect the dots and whether it's glaring that every single ingredient plus is manifest in what we are actually experiencing literally today. Evolution. There is not one self-respecting scientist who is a real microbiologist who truly understands how DNA works, who will tell you that evolution has any chance of being factual. It's a theory that was never proven. And it remains that way. There are a lot of books on the subject. I just thought I would mention one. I got a lot of interesting quotes in here. I don't have the luxury of time to share it with you, but Michael Denton, Professor Dr. Michael Denton, he wrote a book here called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. One point that I thought was very powerful is that Darwin, when he first came up with the theory of evolution, just swallowing. He's quoted himself as admitting in his Origin of Species that there are parts of the human anatomy that are so perfect he cannot understand how it was possible that it evolved to where it is. And he was speaking specifically about the eye. And that's Darwin's own admission. But what Denton points out, and there's a lot of very interesting quotes. I'm quoting from chapter 14, The Puzzle of Perfection. He points out here that in Darwin's time, the microscopes that they had available were able to magnify a molecule to up to 300 times its size. And in that particular magnification, view down a light microscope at a magnification of some several hundred times. Several in English, good English, is about 3 times. So you're about 300-400 times its real size. Under the influence of unseen turbulent forces, a living cell is relatively disappointing spectacle, appearing only as an ever-changing and apparently disordered pattern of blobs and particles, which under the influence of unseen turbulent forces are continually tossed haphazardly in all directions. See, what he's pointing out is that the microscopes they had in those days were not so powerful in comparison to what he's about to describe, that anyone looking at that could understand the havamina, the possibility that in the theory of evolution, molecules are so haphazard in their structure that maybe there is actually some sort of evolution. Now he points out, there's not a microbiologist alive today who would take this seriously, because we have microscopes that are able to magnify a cell 1,000 million times. Can anyone tell me what number that is? 1,000 million is 1 billion times its original size. So he points out that under that level of magnification, he tries to give you a mashal of what it looks like. It's absolutely astonishing. It's equivalent to 20 kilometers in diameter and resembles a a large enough area to cover the whole city of London or New York. What we would then see, and now he describes, imagine a factory which is the size of New York or London. It's about 13 miles across. Actually, New York is 13 miles long, and it's about 3 or 4 miles across. So that's a large factory. Do you all agree? And it's got over 1 million entrances and 1 million exits. And there are all types of rooms inside, and there's a perfection in the exact harmony as all the different goods are delivered through the factory, packaged, and then exit and are then taken to where they are being transported. And he describes in intricate detail that what you see on the microscope at 1 billion times the size of the cell is such perfection of design. Nothing's going wrong unless we interfere with it. Nothing's going wrong. It's screaming out design. And when you see a piece of furniture, as you know, Rabbi Bachya and Chayvas Alavaves, it screams out, there's a carpenter. You see a computer, you know there's a programmer and there's someone who put the hardware together. A human being is so complex, it screams out design. Design dictates a designer. Evolution, at its core, is basically trying to knock God out of the list of possible causes for creation. And so what's actually happened in the promotion of evolution in the universities, high schools, and now down into first grade, literally, which is part of the core curriculum, which I'm going to mention in a few moments. The promotion of evolution is being promoted as a fact that is completely corroborated by science, and it's so untrue. So how do they get away with a lie? Please be merciful me. I'm going to share with you from Amalek. His name is Hitler, Yamach Shemay. Adolf Hitler writes in Mein Kampf, which he wrote in 1924 in a Bavarian jail. He wrote, the magnitude of a lie always contains a certain factor of credibility. And in view of the primitive simplicity of the minds of the masses, they more easily fall victim to a big lie than a small one. The receptivity of the masses is very limited, their intelligence is small, but their power of forgetting is enormous. In consequence of these facts, all effective propaganda, key word, all effective propaganda must be limited to a very few points and must harp on these in slogans till the last member of the public understands what you want them to understand by your slogan. What Hitler in Machshemai is essentially saying is if you tell a lie enough times, it's in print and you hear it again and again. Eventually the whole public buys into it because they're not hearing any other narrative. And that's how you succeed. With this book here, a phenomenal work, extremely well researched. It's a scary read, very powerful. Hitler's Willing Executioners. How did one man manage with a propaganda machine to convince 60 million Germans to willingly participate in the destruction of 6 million Jews? And over 50 million human lives total. And the answer is bystander number 1 or number 2. Number 2 is the vast majority. But they're too scared to speak up. That's how he succeeded. That's how evolution has got so high up on the list. It's literally not only at the top of the list, it's the only cause of life on planet Earth, according to the core curriculum. The core curriculum, we didn't know this when, bless them, I'm not going to say names, but a certain organization signed us up for the core curriculum with the, I think, honest and innocent expectation that they would be able to prove, based on the grades that our children get, that we're doing very well, even if we're not teaching exactly what they're asking of us. But the problem is much, much deeper than that. Because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term conditional funding. Does anyone know what that is? in reference to schools. Conditional funding essentially means that when government funds, then there's a condition. And the condition is they have a right to supervise the standards of education based on their rubrics, on their criterion. And that's a huge problem because under COVID, many of our schools, many of our moisters signed up for conditional funding, not fully understanding the small print. But here's now what's contained in that small print. Evolution is at the top, and it's basically the only cause of reality. That's a huge problem because, as I quoted earlier, in a world without God, everything is permissible. Because once you and I come from a microbe, then we fall into a whole new category. And I'm going to quote to you from, and I'm going to tell you now in advance, I apologize, I'm going to go over a few minutes. I really do believe that Professor Hugo Bergman, Journal of the Holocaust, page 11, as opening speech for Yad Vashem Foundation, declared, the philosophy that led to the rise of Nazism was the 19th century insistence on seeing man as a zoological specimen. Darwinism has broken one of the strongest restraints, preserving the moral imperative, you shall not kill. From this point of view, the wide acceptance of Darwinism can be seen as a turning point in the history of mankind. You see, if you believe in Darwinism, in evolution, if you believe that we come from monkeys and in the survival of the fittest, in natural selection, then Hitler was right. Hitler himself claimed that the Jewish people inflicted 2 wounds on humanity, circumcision on his body and a conscience on his mind. And Hitler took credit for saying that he was here to remove the conscience on our mind, because the Jews represent morality, and by taking the Jews out of the world, God is no longer part of the picture, and you can do what you want. You can be a man, you can be a woman. You can be married to a man. You can be married to a woman, can be married to a woman. Oh, you can change your gender. And it goes on and on. Abortion, new definition. Abortion is up to 24 months. And in some states, they're working very hard to push that. Do you understand what that means? That a 2-year-old child who's not wanted or is not seen as someone who's potentially able to contribute to mankind is not considered yet born, and therefore it's not murder to remove them from this world. It sounds so ridiculous that you and I say that wouldn't happen. In Western society, that doesn't happen. So please be mochel me. I have a niece, Bat Shechaya, Bat Chana Sarah, who's no longer here. She was one year and a quarter old. The hospital who was taking care of her sued my brother and my sister-in-law for cruelty to their daughter, for keeping her alive. According to their definition, keeping her alive was an act of cruelty. And an act of kindness would be that the next time she has a seizure, she would be allowed to die. They took my brother and sister-in-law to court, and they won. This is in England. It's not the only case. Redefining life. Redefining death. Promotion of abortion. Are you hearing that there's a connection between who is Amalek and what's he out to do? Remove God from the equation. How do you start up with God? Oh, you infiltrate the minds of the pretty much Western world and beyond, even the Jewish world, and you start smudging the definitions. Things start becoming grey. Oh, we're promoting abortion, promoting same-gender marriages, thanks to Obama, under the Supreme Court. Oh, and that's an Issa D'Oraisa on a very high level. Promoting transgender operations is a very important, and please forgive me, but it's so rampant in our community, how this is seeping in. I want to share with you, because it's one of there's hardly any books coming out, because this is so recent, that why would a teenager choose to change their gender, especially the girls? So there's a whole psychology behind this, and there's a lady who's very brave, Abigail Shwira, who's a reporter, and she's done a lot of research on this and interviews with, unfortunately, hundreds of these girls who regretted it soon after their first operation and the taking of the hormones. She writes the following: coming out as transgender immediately boosts these girls' social status. Do you hear that? It's speaking to girls who think they're nobody and don't get any attention. But the moment they openly say they are changing gender, all of a sudden everyone's talking with them and they're getting a lot of attention, even in the media. It boosts these girls' social status. Shira finds that once they take steps of actual transition, it's not so easy to walk back, and she offers urgently needed advice about how parents can protect their daughters. A generation of girls is at risk. Abigail Shwira's essential book will help you understand what the trans craze is and how you can inoculate your child against it, or how to retrieve her from this dangerous path. This is a very simple reality, and it's being promoted constantly. I don't think we, as a frum community, in our isolation and insulation, even with our smartphones and access to internet, I don't think we fully realize how far gone it already is. I send every year to different training, the most conservative, non-Jewish training that you could possibly imagine. I can't do it anymore because the new laws require that preschool teachers don't call the children boys and girls. You can lose your job for that. Because they haven't decided yet. What right do you have to impose on them that they are a boy or a girl? They haven't decided. And the girls and the boys, the people, the children, are told this, that they're not a boy or girl until they've decided what they want to be. And this is part of core curriculum that's under conditional funding that has been signed off on by many of our moisters. That now we're trying to fight in Albany. Now we realize what a mess this is, and it's only just starting. First and second grade children are taught what chassan and a kala much more than they would be told in the weeks or days before the chuppah. And they're being taught how to do motzi zerel vatala. I don't want to say the English terminology, because they are promoting promiscuity. On this line is that starting with 4 years old, if the 4-year-old gives consent to an adult teacher, assistant teacher, or anyone else in the school, then beer, promiscuity, and sex is permitted, and there's no recourse. That's not called molestation. That's called consent. Do you understand? This is what is being forced, and what's really weird is how did it happen that 193 countries have the same core curriculum? How did 193 governments somehow align this way? So what I'm about to share with you was research done by Rabbi Abrahams, lives in Gateshead. He has his own business, he's a businessman, but for the last 15 years he's been independently researching technology awareness and helping moisters and Rabbanim, Rosh Hashivas, become aware of what's going on in the technological world. And he started to notice, how is it that the core curriculum that is promoting, is telling children about evolution. You have to teach evolution. And not as a theory, they're teaching it as factual. They're teaching premarital relations. They're teaching that you don't have to listen to your parents. If they tell you you're a boy or a girl, it's not their authority to tell you that. You can decide that on your own. You can decide who to have a physical relationship with. And you're talking about young children. They don't have discerning minds. They're not a bardas yet. So on Abraham's, he dug it up, and it's really ridiculous. It's so crazy. The only way this 193 nations could come up with the same core curriculum is because it's actually being imposed by conditional funding from the UN. The UN, we know, have never been big friends of the Jewish people, and certainly not those who live in Eretz Yisrael. But the UN are the ones who actually created what's called the International Core Curriculum. It was created by a person by the name of Dr. Robert Muller, and I don't want to go into details because it's so sick, so terrifying, that his mentor was Alice Bailey. I don't suggest you even check her out, who wrote a 10-point plan for the destruction. This is the name of the document. 10-point plan for the destruction of Judeo-Christian values and family. That's the name of the document. And it's laid out there how to do that. And in those 10 points, it includes using the media as a propaganda machine. And this has been going on since Hitler, Yamach Shemai. Under Hitler, I know from my mother, Leah Shalom, my mother was born in Baghdad. She escaped in 1951. She and her ailing mother, my mother was already orphaned from her father, and her mother passed away 6 months after they managed to arrive in England safely, but they had to sell 3 properties for 2 passports, no luggage. They left the country with no money, nothing, only 2 passports, and it cost them to sell 3 properties. And my mother used to tell us that during the World War II, the Nazis provided the Arabs with radios that were given out free. And the only stations you could hear was propaganda against the Jews, against Israel, against the Allies. And so the Arabs were being stirred up. She remembers a pogrom that took place on Shavuos. 300 Jews were butchered to death. You don't hear about this. It's not popular. But I'm just sharing with you that propaganda works. You tell a lie enough times and you put it in print again and again and again, we start to believe. And all I'm here to share with you is all you have to do is, once you know it's Amalek, with all the ingredients, deceit, sayed beper. Once you know what Amalek is really about, the only thing you need to know what the real message is reverse the message. That's all you need to do. I know this only because I was raised in the world of advertising. I did over hundreds of commercials with my father, who was the best in the world in the film industry, in dubbing, in revoicing. That was with movies and commercials, whatnot. I did hundreds and hundreds of commercials, not in person, with my voice. And I'm not going to give you examples tonight of the deceit that is used in the words. I'm just going to share with you the following. Anything you hear the media tell you, if you are suspect, all you have to ask yourself is reverse the message, and now you know what they're talking about. I'm going to give you a couple of very simple examples. Life insurance was not always known as life insurance. Its actual name was death insurance. But for some odd reason, when Grandma got a knock on the door, hello, can I help you? Yes, I'm selling death insurance and accessories. Death? Not for me, thank you. So, and it was something about the word death that was not very endearing, so they changed it to life insurance. I'm not knocking life insurance, I'm just showing you how words are used to manipulate. It's very simple. Social media. Oh, this is awesome! Do you know how many friends I got, how many checks I got on this TikTok, on Instagram, and all these other... Mrs. Klein, who lost a child to suicide a number of years ago in Borough Park, said her daughter had 6,000 followers on Facebook. This is how many turned up to the funeral. Social media! Really? Do you see the person's face? Okay, maybe on a Zoom. When Zoom doesn't work, what do you say? Gum Zoom Latova. Social media! In a text, do you hear the intonation? Can you hear the intent in the voice? In a text? In an email? In a WhatsApp? Social? Reverse the words and you know what it's about. And now you know what we're training our children. Anti-social media. It's avoiding face-to-face. Hardly ever have to pick up the phone anymore because hardly anyone's calling. We're all on WhatsApp. It's anti-social media, and it's the breakdown of communication, of intimacy. It's a very simple breakdown where children at the youngest age, 3 years old, are seeing adults on these devices that the children want them to and to play with them, and if you or I don't know how to fix something, just give it to your 3-year-old and they'll probably figure it out. Okay, 4 or 5. The point I'm bringing out though is that these children are being trained in not interfacing, playing, learning to get along with differences, because we are social media communicating. That's not real communication. It's antisocial. All you have to do is ask, oh, this is for your health? This is going to save your life? Really? Connect the dots. We're dealing with... I'm not here to make a political statement. I'm here to ask ourselves, there's never been a time in history where Amalek would have a chance to reach everybody. Almost literally everybody in the world is communicable through the devices. I'm not making the devices or technology wrong. I'm just sharing a simple observation that this is the last battle that Amalek has a chance to implant in the world and inject in us a belief that we cannot stand up to the bullying and the intimidation, and that we've just got to go along with the narrative. And we've been doing it, not realizing it, when we signed up for the core curriculum, because the core curriculum is promoting the worst denigrating aveiras, mishkav zachar, same-gender marriages, alternate lifestyles. And on September the 28th, if this is not reversed in Albany, then inspectors who are not trained in any special way, they're not necessarily machanchin of any sort, they're not educators, they are able to come in under New York State law into the meisters to determine whether we are following the curriculum. Are we teaching mishkav zachar? Are we teaching transgender operations as a legitimate? Are we promoting evolution? Do you hear the problem? And they can shut us down for that. That's why these signatures on the petitions were so important. But I'm just simply bringing out that we've been too quiet and silent and compliant in not realizing that we're being invited. Because the invitation is, who is going to be on Hashem's side is good against evil. And that means we need a lot of number 3 bystanders. Because number 1 loses out. Al tamud al dam recha. Number 2 loses out because it's also al tamud al dam recha. And if I think that, hey, I'm scared I'll get killed or knocked off because I'm going public, well, then who am I more afraid of? I'm more afraid of who's out there, or am I afraid of a Kadosh Baruch Hu? And that's really a very simple choice I have to make. And if I've got a relative, and I've got a few who've died recently from these injections, why should we be quiet? I have one relative, she was paralyzed after the first injection, and then she was told she had to take the second one, and she believed it. She's in her early 80s. Unfortunately, she took the second one as well. This is, and we're not talking. We're not being open. We're not being realistic. I have a member of my family who works in imports and exports, and when hydroxychloroquine was forbidden because it works, and Zelenko is dubbed a quack. He had over 2,000 patients who had COVID, and this is how many died from it because of his protocols. And a relative, I didn't ask him permission to say his name. It was a relative of mine who works in imports and exports. When it was forbidden to bring it into the country, he was trying to figure out, how can I get hold of this for the Jewish community? So he turned to one of the manufacturers in Israel, and they gave him the ingredients. Do you know what the ingredients are? 99% lemon peel. Are you scared? Are you worried of a heart attack? Really? We need to start opening our eyes and be honest with ourselves. Rabbi Shloim, you're bringing us to a point where either I'm outraged by what the UN is imposing on the governments, which the governments are complying with, and it's coming from the exact same sources, the WEF, UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Cultural and Scientific Organization. They are behind the core curriculum. The core curriculum is based on atheism. Atheism is the face of Amalek. Deceit is the face of Amalek. Promiscuity is the face of Amalek. And he's not ashamed to be honest about his identity. Why am I ashamed to stand up for Hashem? I couldn't believe that in a question-answer session, one from Jew asked in the audience, there was about 1,000 people in the room, how do you handle when someone asks you, what do you say about homosexuality? So I said, well, I don't really have to say anything because God has already spoken on the subject. So I agree with God. Now, there's more detail you can go into. How do you deal with someone who thinks they are or is already practicing that? But homosexuality, Mishkav Zachar, is so promoted in today's age that the what's it called? NCSY, thank you. NCSY, which used to be headed by Rabbi Weinreb, he told me himself that in the last 4 conventions, there's only 2 items on the agenda, and none of them are kiruv. On the campuses, there are 2 items that are discussed at the convention for the last 4 years. Number 1, in this order, homosexuality. Every boy and girl is being oppressed on a daily basis. How do you know if you haven't tried? How do you know? There is no way a person can send their child on campus today. And there are so many from Jews who came from yeshiva and are going there and can't take it and then start asking themselves, well, how do I know? And then they turn around and tell their parents, because they tried it once or twice, that they think they're now a different... And do you understand what's going on? That's pressure number 1, and number 2 is anti-Semitism. Kiruv is not on the agenda. Constant anti-Semitism. The campuses are full of this agenda. I'm not even calling it a liberal agenda, because it's Amalek. Just call it what it is, so that we know who our enemy is, so we know who to ask Hashem to daven for when we say Laminim v'lamalshinim al ti tikva. And when we get to V'chazeidim karega yavedu, almost all the Mefarshim tell us Zaydim is going on Amalek. So I know who I'm davening, Rabbeinu Shalom. This is your war. You promised. You promised. That's strange. Why did you make an oath? Why do you have to make an oath? Oh, because there might come a time in history where we feel so overwhelmed by the rishus, the hypocrisy, and this blurring of lines. What's called life? What's called death? What's called abortion? Oh, they're promoting cremation. Do you know why? They want to put it into law. Because your dead body has no sanctity and is wasting real estate. And it's bad for the environment. So you're playing into climate control of the environment being destroyed by... Do you understand what's going on? Euthanasia, assisted suicide. You put it all together, it screams out, Amalek says God is not here. Amalek says the human body has no sanctity, and therefore there's no difference between a human being and a mosquito. And therefore we can decide who's worthy of being alive and who's not worthy of being alive. And here's where I close. I'm going to end with a mashal, but before I get to the mashal, look it up for yourselves. United Nations, it's called Agenda 21. 21 is referring to the century. And it's so clever. And it's not even covert. And, this is Amalek through and through. Combating poverty. Implement as a matter of urgency in accordance with country-specific conditions and legal systems measures to ensure that women and men have the same right to decide freely and responsibly on the number of children and their spacing, and have access to the information, education, and means appropriate to enable them to exercise this right. There are a few paragraphs like this. It's talking about, I'll read it out Here's another one. Page 23, paragraph 5, line 3. The growth of world population and production combined with unsustainable consumption patterns places increasingly severe stress on the life-supporting capabilities of our planet. I'll translate. The resources of planet Earth are limited. Therefore, the overpopulation is going to be a tax on our resources, and therefore we need to take measures to depopulate the world. Is this clear or not? It's deceit, but it's almost literally in black and white. And one of the ways they do that is to promote gender equality. Gender equality means that by giving women equal rights, equal access to the workplace, equal payment, etc., what ends up happening is they will have less time to raise families, and that will help reduce the population. Now, I don't know what's going through your mind. You might say, I don't hear it so bad. Well, let me introduce you to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says on the subject. Ani kel Shakai, he says to Yaakov Avinu, I am the power of Shakai, Shin, Dalet, and Yud. Says Rashi, quoting Chazal, Shakai is a word which denotes the following. Yesh le'elkusi dai lechol bria. There's enough power in my elkusi. Elokim means power of powers. There's enough power for me to provide for every single creature, from the ant to the human and the hippopotamus. I can provide and the next words are Puruvu. Ani kel shakai Puruvu. Don't be afraid. So if you hear someone telling you, and it happens to be the United Nations, who's funding the WHO, who's funding the vaccinations, ask yourself, be honest. Do the dots connect or not? Who are we truly dealing with? I'm not saying there's a one person here. It's a whole movement. And it's a very powerful movement. It's not the liberals in government. It's way beyond that. And now I close, and I truly mean it. And I believe that this is really what I feel is the crux of it all. This is taken from Mishlei Hasidim. There's a beautiful mashal there of a king who wants to determine who in his kingdom are truly loyal to him. So he calls in his general, and he has a secret conversation where he tells the general, I want you to go out and don't tell anybody. Take the army and go from city to city and lay siege and threaten that unless the city agrees to join you in rebellion against me, you're going to come back and destroy that city. And I want you to go from every single town and city and bring back me a list so I know who's loyal to me and who's not. So the general goes from one city to the next, and many of the townspeople are petrified. And they don't agree with the bully, but they're in fear that they're going to be destroyed. So they agree, but they don't want to because they don't feel the king is really doing anything wrong. They actually find him benevolent. He's gracious. He's kind. Why would I? But you're telling the general is going to start up. And so they sign that they'll join the rebellion. Goes to one after another after the other. And some of them say, this is ridiculous. Are you out of your mind? The king there's nothing, he's a very good king. He's good to use. What are you rebelling for? And it makes all sorts of promises how you're going to live longer if you are under his rulership, etc. Eventually, gets to one city, and the Hacham in that city says to himself, you know what, this doesn't make any sense. How can the king not know that his own general is going from city to city to city and starting up this rebellion? How can he not know about it? So he says, you know, this makes no sense. It must be that the general was sent by the king. And there's no rebellion. It's just an invitation of whose side am I on, for me to prove my mettle, my loyalty, my love for my king. So in the Nimshal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the Satan. And he's an Eved to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even Nebuchadnezzar 3 times in Yirmiyahu, Hashem calls him in the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, Nebuchadnezzar HaMelech Avdi. Look at the Radak and Rashi, Avdi, because he is a stick in my hand to do my bidding. And if the Yidden don't do Teshuvah, I'll use him to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Haman! Chazal tell us, I think it's Gemara Megillah, Daf Yud Daled, that all the Nevi'im, 48 that were recorded, and all the 7 Nevi'os could not accomplish, with all their Ahavas Yisrael and all their Terchacha, their loving, gentle correction, could not accomplish what Haman accomplished in 5 seconds. It took 5 seconds to remove the signature ring of authority from the hand of Ahasuerus to the hand of Haman, and in that moment, he had the authority to destroy all the Yidden. And then we did Teshuvah. Oh, whatever you see out there, it's all orchestrated. Is Hashem is sending an invitation. What Moshe Rabbeinu saw was Hashem surfacing in his life through a Mitzri about to kill a Jew. And he decided who he was. I'm bystander number 3. And he did the same with Dasan and Aviram, and he did the same with the daughters of Yisrael. And Hashem made him Moshe Rabbeinu. And Pinchas the same. He's going to be bystander number 3. So our invitation, which is what I believe we're being invited to do, is to not be silent, to be honest with ourselves for the sake of our lives here for eternity and our children, our grandchildren, that they should be part of a world that Amalek is not so prominent and we are not living in fear of him, because that's not how Hashem wants us to live. He wants us to know it's just a Nisayan, and all I have to do is say, Rabbi Shalom, I love you no matter what. And even if I do die, what a ridiculous statement. When I die, everyone's going to die. Well, if I at least die for you, then there's Tchiyus Mesim, and we believe in it with Emunah Shalema. So what am I in fear of? What am I in fear of? And that is really the crux. Me, Hashem, Eli. Am I going to side with the Kodesh Baruch Hu? Or am I going to, in my silence, innocently be siding with the Sitra Achra? In the schus of knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu only loves us and only wants the best and has already told us He's going to win. Macha Yim Timcha. It's a double lashon, and I close on this, I truly mean it. I will ensure that they will be completely wiped out. But Timcha, you got to do your part. And that is, Archaim HaKadosh says, I've got to do my part. And what's my part? Amalek's klippa is arayas more than anything else. To guard my eyes, to guard my mouth, to guard my mind, my thoughts, and to be the best I can be as a role model to those of my closest sphere of influence, that we don't fall into the trap of believing the narrative that's been forced upon us and start connecting the dots. Rabbi Shalom, you're sending the general to check on me. Whose side am I on? In that schus, we should all be zeicha to make the right decisions. And Hadrachini ba'amisecha, Hashem, please guide us in your MS. Amen. I really apologize. I took Rabbi Bull too literally.
Shem Eden Shir Torah most is Boston like to be a Shekar Rabbi Rietti from Inspiring Drasha. I say can help Eden Shir Torah be Makai Moche Tumcha Zecha Amalek by sponsoring one of the shiurim and supporting Eden Shir Torah. Call 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com for this great schus. We have to give a big yashikar to Mr. and Mrs. Matas Abraham for sponsoring tonight's shir. Lili Nishmas, Moshe Yaakov and Matas Sholem. Osher ben Al-Tachai Mishaya, Chaim Middle Bas Shai Yehuda, Yehudis Bas Moshe Yaakov, Itasar Bas Rabbi Yisrael, Al-Havda ben Chaim L'chaim, as Chus for 4 Shleim of a Gittel Bas Tvora, and for the Shidduch Hagam Bekar, for Chava Middle Bas Rufke Chai, and Rachel Bas Gittel Miriam. Also, I'd like to give a yashikach to the Gutman Newfield families for the support for tonight's Shir, the Nishmas Aisha Gittel Bas Moshe Shalom, Yortzeit Rosh Chodesh Av. I'd give a big shekach to Rabbi Mr. David Lang for the support for tonight's Shir Lili Nishmas Aisha Devar Ala Shalom Bas Rabbi Shon area Lang is Yortzeit, second Yortzeit tonight Chavtes Tammuz. Also like to give a big shekach to Beilam Shem for the support for tonight's Shir Schutz for Zivag Hogan for Meir Chaim and Chaveita Sie verhogen mit Mehera. Yasher Koach everyone for coming. Reb Chananya ben Akashem, Rotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zachis, as Yisrael Afigre Heben and Torah Mitzvah Shenem Alein Chofetz and Tzidke Yagdul Torah V'Yader.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.